Hello and welcome to this training video on creating different key lighting effects. And what we're going to do is start off by taking this source file here and faking a high key lighting shot. Now high key lighting is typical studio based photography where you've got a happy family in a white backdrop and it's very overlit, so the shadows aren't very strong and dramatic, but they're very filled in and light, and that gives a very positive upbeat feel to the shot. And you can do that by either overexposing the camera slightly or much more safely changing the lighting and the shading in Photoshop. And we'll look at element 6 because there's some tools there that will help us to create this high key effect, and we'll start off with this source file. So pop open element 6 and go to File, Open, and navigate to the file you want, which is high key start. Click open and you'll see the file in the interface. Now the first thing to do is, we can see it visually, but let's have a look at the histogram, because that's always a good way of diagnosing a shot's existing tones. So if you go to Window, Histogram, you can see that this particular shot has a lot of shadow information at the far left. As we move through, we can see a fair amount of midtone, fairly low level midtone information, and then lots of highlights. Now this highlight peak here will be due to the background, I guess, because that's the brightest part of the shot and there's quite a lot of it. Now a traditional high key image, if you had a much wider aperture and the person was being lit perhaps from the front, they'd look fairly flat lit, which she does, but there are some modelling shadows going on around the cheekbones here, and what we're going to do is re-edit the image to have a histogram that's a little bit more biased towards the right here. So we've got brighter highlights and stronger midtones, and that will just whiten out some of these shadows here and create a flatter looking and brighter image. But we'll also keep the lovely dark tones of the hair as well, so that we've got a bit of contrast there, because high key images can still have contrast to draw the eye into the shot, especially around the eyes here. We don't want to wash out the dark blacks of the eyes, so we're just going to play with the skin tones primarily. And I'll also show you how to desaturate the image as well to give you a typical slightly washed out looking high key effect. Now what we'll do is use the enhance option. We'll go to adjust color, and there's a color curve option here that will let us change the tones of the colors in the shot to create a more high key effect. So we go adjust color curves like so. Before we do that though, it's always a good idea just to duplicate the original layer so that we can come back to that if we need to restore any of the colors or shades of that particular shot. So drag it onto the create new layer icon, and there you have a copy. And now we can start editing the copy. We could use adjustment layers, and we will do a bit later to tweak this, but you don't have a color curve adjustment layer unfortunately, so that's why I've made a copy of this particular layer. Right, let's go back to enhance, adjust color curves. Now the cool thing about adjust color curves is you've got a variety of styles to play with, and if you want to lighten the shadows, for example, because shadows in a high key effect, especially on the face, could be a bit lighter, then you could click on this button here to lighten them up like that. And let's go to default again to see the difference. So it's just filling in a little bit of shadow detail, but we don't want to lose too much of these rich blacks here, so I've got to be careful with that. The next thing we could have a look at is perhaps to increase the midtones, because we want a nice flat looking and brighter selection, and the midtones basically cover all of the skin area. So if you go to increase midtones, then you get this type of version as well, but that overrides the curves that we used on lightened shadows. So basically these are a good starting point to experiment, darkening highlights for example, but if you want to create an overall image with lighter midtones and darker shadows, then you have to go and adjust these sliders manually. So let's go back to default and let's do some tweaking with these sliders here. So let's start off by brightening up those midtones. And if we take this slider up to about here, you can see that the midtones are lightening around the face area here. Don't go too far to the right, otherwise you start to get a kind of posterizing out of gamut color range kind of color that won't print, and it looks a little bit horrible as well. So something like that should do to start with. And then let's brighten up the highlights as well using this section, and you can see the highlight part of the curve is climbing up and brightening as well, like so. So we're trying to get a lighter, more flat look face And we need, of course, to play around with things like mid-tone contrast. So let's just take that down. Not too far left, otherwise again you start to get solarizing. So just a little bit to the left, just to whiten up those highlights a little bit on the face. And then we can just tweak the shadows by popping those up as well. And don't worry about the hair at the moment, we're just looking at the face, that's the bit we're interested in. And now we have a slightly whiter, more overexposed and less contrasting look to the face, which is very typical of high key effects. And when you're happy, click OK. If you're unhappy, click reset and start again, and then we can move on to adjust the saturation of the shot in part 2.